What would you do if the forest you love turned into a haunting memory? A few years ago, I set out on a nostalgic camping trip, eager to reconnect with nature. But as darkness fell, I discovered that the woods held more than just echoes of my childhood. Whispers slithered through the trees, drawing me into a chilling mystery that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew. Join me as I recount those 4 true terrifying camping horror stories. A night that began with a simple campfire and ended with a revelation that still sends shivers down my spine. But before we delve into tonight's terrifying tales, a huge shout out to all of you. Your support fuels this channel and keeps the nightmares coming. If our eerie stories captivate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a chilling episode. And if you want to help us grow and keep the fear alive, share our videos, drop a comment, or explore our support options on Patreon or Ko-fi. Every bit of support helps us bring you the best spine-tingling content. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey. Now let's embrace the shadows together. A few years back, I decided to spend a weekend camping solo in a remote part of the national forest, where I used to go with friends as a kid. It had been ages since I'd felt the call of the wild, and the idea of reconnecting with nature was enticing. I packed my gear, stocked up on supplies, and set off on a Friday afternoon. The drive was scenic, winding through tall pines and open fields. I arrived at the campground, nestled deep in the forest around sunset. The fading light cast long shadows among the trees, and the air was crisp with the scent of pine. I quickly set up my tent, grateful for the familiar surroundings that felt both nostalgic and comforting. As darkness fell, I lit a small campfire, the flames crackling as I cooked a simple dinner. The sounds of the forest enveloped me, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, and the occasional hoot of an owl. I relished the solitude, but as the fire burned low, a strange sensation settled in. It felt as if the forest was alive, whispering secrets in the cool night air. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just the wind. After a few more hours of reading by the fire, I decided to turn in. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and tried to shake off the unease that had crept in. Around midnight, I woke to a faint sound. It was barely audible, like distant voices carried on the wind. I strained to listen, but the moment I focused, the sound would fade away. I told myself it was just my imagination and tried to go back to sleep. But the whispers continued, growing slightly louder, almost rhythmic. Curiosity piqued. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The moon hung high, casting silvery light on the campsite. I listened closely, the whispers now distinct, like a conversation just out of reach. I followed the sound, cautiously making my way deeper into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying gently as if urging me to turn back. But I pressed on, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and intrigue. The voices seemed to lead me to a clearing a few hundred yards from my camp. As I stepped into the clearing, the whispers abruptly stopped. I felt a chill run down my spine. The moon illuminated a circle of stones at the center of the clearing, forming what looked like an old fire pit. Surrounding it were the remnants of long abandoned tents, their fabric faded and torn, as if they had been left in haste. I crouched down to inspect the area, and that's when I saw it. A small, weathered journal half buried in the dirt. My hands trembled as I picked it up, brushing off the leaves and grime. Flipping it open, I found entries from years ago, written by someone named Mark. The entries began innocently enough, detailing camping trips and nature observations. But as I read on, the tone changed. Mark described hearing whispers at night too. He wrote about feeling watched, about shadows lurking just beyond the tree line. The last entry sent chills through me. They don't want us here. I can hear them calling me. I have to go deeper. Just then, I heard a rustle behind me. I snapped the journal shut and turned, my heart racing. In the dim light, I saw a figure at the edge of the clearing, a man standing completely still. He was dressed in ragged clothes and his hair hung wild around his face. I couldn't make out his features, but the intensity of his gaze was unsettling. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow step forward. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, dropping the journal, which landed open on the ground, pages fluttering in the breeze. "Leave this place," he finally said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "They will come for you if you stay." I turned to run, the whispers in my mind echoing Mark's last entry as I dashed back through the trees. The sound of my heartbeat drowned out everything else. I could have sworn I heard laughter following me, a chilling sound carried by the wind. Reaching my campsite, I didn't hesitate to pack my gear. I was a bundle of nerves as I stuffed my tent and sleeping bag into my backpack, barely able to think straight. The forest felt oppressive, and the darkness seemed to close in around me. As I made my way back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every snap of a twig made me jump, and I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. It wasn't until I reached my car that I felt a small sense of relief wash over me. Driving away, I looked back at the forest, a dark mass looming against the starry sky. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the whispers still echoing in my mind. Weeks later, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I researched the area and found nothing unusual, just the same forest I remembered. But when I went back to the clearing on a whim, the remnants of the camp were gone, as if they had never existed. No stones, no journal, just an empty patch of ground. I used to go camping all the time with my college buddies, but after graduation it became difficult to find time that worked for everyone. Our schedules had diverged, and I found myself planning trips on my own. There was a campground we frequented, a place that felt familiar and comforting, so I decided to return there. It was a bit off the beaten path, not the easiest to get to, which was part of its charm. There were plenty of easier spots nearby, so it was usually quiet and secluded. I knew the route well, and after a smooth drive, I arrived without any trouble. The campground was just as I remembered, open spaces surrounded by trees, a small fire pit, and a serene atmosphere that made it a perfect getaway. I set up my tent and organized my gear, feeling content in my solitude. Not long after I arrived, I noticed a man walking into the area. He appeared to be an ordinary hiker, but he was carrying only a small backpack, definitely no tent or camping gear in sight. This struck me as odd. This particular spot wasn't very scenic or inviting for a day hike. It was a pleasant place to camp, but it didn't seem like a destination worth the trek if you weren't staying overnight. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was looking for a quiet place to relax, just as I was. I stayed by my tent while he set up on the far side of the campground. As evening approached, I wandered away from my tent to prepare my dinner. It was around 6 p.m. when I noticed him leaving. I thought it was a bit late for him to be heading back, considering it would soon be dark, and the hike back was probably 3 hours. I shrugged it off, focusing on my meal. I boiled some water on my small camping stove and prepared one of my freeze-dried meals. As I finished eating, I noticed the sun was dipping below the horizon. To set the mood, I hung a small lantern on the side of my tent and sat outside for a while, absorbing the tranquility of the woods. But then a realization hit me. I was completely alone. Normally, this time would be filled with laughter and stories shared around a campfire with friends, but tonight, it felt eerily quiet. After some time, I turned off the lantern, crawled into my tent, and settled in for the night. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps. It was so dark inside my tent that I couldn't tell how long I had been asleep, but the footsteps were growing louder, coming closer. I held my breath, straining to listen, and after a few moments the sounds stopped just outside my tent. Feeling a rush of adrenaline, I reached for my lantern, turned it on, and unzipped the tent flap. I peered out into the darkness. About 20 feet away stood a figure, a man silhouetted against the faint glow of my lantern. It was difficult to make out details, but he was positioned right where I had seen the other hiker before. He didn't move, just stood there, and the sight sent a wave of unease through me. It was late enough in the night that his presence was immediately disturbing, regardless of the context. I called out to him, "Hey, are you okay?" My voice felt small in the vastness of the night. I waited for a response, but he stood silently, not acknowledging me. I couldn't even discern which way he was facing. He could have been looking away from me or staring directly at me. Both possibilities were equally unsettling. I instinctively reached for my pocket knife, feeling a rush of unease wash over me. All I could do was sit there, frozen, watching him. Time dragged on. Each passing minute felt like an eternity. I kept my lantern trained on him, and he remained still, barely moving, as if caught in a trance. After what felt like the longest 15 minutes of my life, he suddenly turned and began to walk away in the same direction he had come from. I watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and dread. As he moved, it became clear that he had been facing me the whole time, just watching. I felt chills run through me, the realization settling in that he had been observing me from the shadows. His footsteps faded into the distance, and I was left with a sense of lingering tension in the silence. Unsure of what to do, I decided to stay awake, heart racing in case he returned. I listened intently for any sounds, but as far as I know, he never came back. The next morning, I packed up my gear, still shaken by the night's events. I drove home, relieved to be safe but also unsettled by the encounter. Since that night, I haven't gone camping again. The thought of that man standing there, watching me, is something I can't shake. I often wonder what he was doing out there in the woods. It's terrifying to think about what might have happened if I hadn't woken up to notice him. The experience has left me with a lasting unease about being alone in the wild. This story happened when I was in middle school during the summer. My parents had enrolled me in a month-long boys' summer camp. The camp had everything you'd expect. Several small cabins nestled in the woods, a small lake, a few fire pits, and even a sand volleyball court. It was about a 4-hour drive from our town. Although the place was a bit run down, it was still functional for summer activities. Upon arrival, I unpacked my things in one of the cabins and set up my sleeping area. A few other campers suggested exploring the forest before dinner. The camp rules were relaxed. We could wander as long as we could still see the cabins. As we ventured into the woods, one of the kids spotted a man a few yards away. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing tattered clothes and sporting a scruffy grey beard. We figured he was just another camp counselor, albeit a strange-looking one. He gave us a peculiar smile, and I awkwardly waved back. That evening we shared our encounter with one of the counselors, who took our concerns seriously. They went to check out the area, but by that time, the man had vanished. We began to realize that most counselors were teenagers themselves, and it seemed they didn't recognize the man. In the days that followed, we refrained from further exploring, still feeling uneasy. Then, on the fourth night, things escalated. I woke up to the sound of the cabin door handle rattling. Normally, a counsellor would remind us to lock our doors around 11 p.m, so I thought it was just that. I didn't have a clock, so I couldn't be sure. Being the only one awake, I felt compelled to call out, assuming it was a counsellor. Just then, a flashlight shone through the windows, making it clear someone was peering inside. I motioned for the other kids to stay down as the figure moved around the cabin, shining the light through every window. I don't know if they saw me, but the light passed over me several times. After about 5 minutes, the flashlight turned off, plunging us back into silence. I explained what had happened, and one of the kids checked the time, 4 a.m. It wasn't a counsellor, and we stayed awake until morning. When the teenage counsellor came to wake us for breakfast, we immediately recounted our experience. He seemed taken aback and took us to speak with some of the adult counsellors. As we retold our story, we learned something that chilled us to the bone. A boy from another cabin had gone for a late-night walk to the bathroom and noticed someone at his cabin door. Initially thinking it was a counsellor, he grew suspicious when he saw the person trying to pick the lock. When asked for a description, the boy recalled that the man had a beard and wore dirty clothes, exactly like the man we'd spotted in the woods. In light of this unsettling news, the camp was abruptly cancelled for the safety of the kids. A bus arrived that afternoon to take us home. Years later, I did some research and discovered a small report about the incident. After we left, the police were called in and searched the area. They found a small tent nearby which contained essential supplies and hundreds of Polaroid photos of the camp, pictures of the cabins, canoes by the lake, and fire pits. Among them were unsettling images of campers, mostly taken from afar, as if the photographer was trying to stay hidden. The most disturbing photos were taken at night, peering through cabin windows. The police waited for someone to return to the tent, but no one ever did. To this day, the man was never found. To understand my story, you need to know a bit about the rules regarding land use in my area. Essentially, if you're respectful and don't cause damage, you can walk over hills or camp on beaches, as long as you leave them as you found them. I've always loved camping, a passion that began in my childhood. My family frequently went on trips with friends, usually gathering a group of about 10. We often visited a secluded beach, a favorite spot that wasn't too crowded and was mainly filled with families. There were even basic facilities like toilets and showers nearby. In spring 2011, we decided to return to this beach. I remember this trip well because I had adopted my dog Parmesan just a few months earlier. She was a 6-month-old puppy rescued from a difficult situation. Though I wasn't sure of her exact breed, I suspected she was a mix of Lurcher and Staffordshire. Parmesan was gentle with people and other dogs but had a strong protective instinct. This time, it was just my immediate family, my mom, dad, sister, and Parmesan. Normally, we would have friends with us, but I didn't mind. The 6-hour drive ended with us arriving just as the sun was setting. Not the best time for setting up a tent, but we expected to see other campers already settled in. To our surprise, the beach was completely empty. My parents started unloading the car while I let Parmesan out for some fresh air. The quiet was unsettling, and as my dad struggled with a tent, my mom mentioned a car that kept driving around. My dad dismissed her concerns. Soon, a vehicle pulled up, and a figure stumbled out. The dim light made it hard to see, but as he approached, we realized he was unsteady and carrying a large knife. My heart raced as my dad instinctively stepped in front of us, gripping a camping mallet. The man shouted at us to leave, and my dad tried to remain calm, but things escalated quickly. My sister and I were terrified, shaking and crying. Just when it seemed like a confrontation was unavoidable, Parmesan sprang into action. She lunged at the man, biting his arm and causing him to drop the knife. In the chaos, he kicked and punched her, but she held on long enough for him to flee back to his car. Shaken, we hurriedly packed up and got back into the car. I checked on Parmesan. She seemed okay, though we realized the window was much more open than I'd left it. It appeared she had squeezed through the gap during the commotion. Given our fear, my parents decided to drive home instead of staying the night. We needed gas, so we headed toward the nearest town. As we approached a gas station, I felt a chill. Parked behind a van was the man with the knife, tending to his injured arm. My dad quickly turned the car around, opting to find another town, but it was 60 miles away, and our fuel was running low. As we drove, the same car began following us. Panic set in. The reality of our situation was overwhelming. My parents tried to stay calm, but I could sense their fear. For half an hour, we drove in silence, the gas gauge dipping dangerously close to empty. Just when I thought we were out of luck, we miraculously found a gas station and filled up. Exhausted, my sister and I fell asleep in the car, and when we finally made it home, we felt immense relief. The next day, my mum reported the incident to the police, only to learn that the man matched the description of a suspect wanted for a serious crime. Whether he was truly dangerous or just an unfortunate encounter, the fear he instilled in us lingered. In the end, I took away a deep appreciation for Parmesan. She had protected us in a way I could never have anticipated, proving that sometimes our four-legged friends can be our greatest heroes. If you've encountered a terrifying event or have a spine-chilling horror story to share, we at Eerie Shadows want to hear from you. Share your experiences with us and let's uncover the mysteries lurking in the eerie shadows together. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more eerie tales and spine-chilling stories like this one.